We continue now at the top of Daf Chesam and Aleph and Maseches Horios. This is Horios Daf 8a. The Gemara continues V'shavin, and they both agree. That refers to Rebbe and the Rabbanon. Rebbe and the Rabbanon both agree. We'll see Rashi in a moment. She'ein mevi asham talui, that a Kohen Gadol does not bring an asham talui. Again, an asham talui is generally brought in a situation where there is a suffix whether the person needs to bring a chatas or not. So in a situation of a suffix by a chatas, you bring an asham talui, but a Kohen Gadol does not bring an asham talui. And the Gemara says, Minolan, from where do we know that a Kohen Gadol doesn't bring an asham talui? Tichsiv, because it's written in the pasuk. This is what it says in the pasuk by asham talui. It says, V'chiper olav ha-kohen al shigegasu asher shogag, that it's going to be an atonement for his mistake. Rebbe holds Misha kol cheto bishkaga. The pasuk refers to somebody who all of his chatoim, all of his sins are bishkaga. That's what he brings a carbon for. Yotza zeh, that excludes this situation, meaning it excludes a Kohen Gadol. She'ein kol cheto bishkaga. Not all of his sins are bishogeg, are just with a mistake in terms of what he did. Ella behelam davar, but you do have situations where a Kohen Gadol is going to bring the carbon behelam davar as well, meaning there was a mistaken ruling that he issued. The Gemara says, Midi kol ksiv. Does it say anything in the pasuk about kol? Because we're darshaning kol cheto bishkaga. Does it say the word kol? And the Gemara says, in yes. Dimkei nichtov al shigagaso. Because otherwise it could have just said al shigagaso. Lamali asher shogag. What's the added phrase? Al shigagaso asher shogag. It seems repeated. It seems repetitive. Hakamash malan. It's teaching us da'ad diika kol cheto bishkaga, that it has to be all of his sins have to be bishkaga. Again, we'll see Rashi in a moment. V'Rabbanan, now the Rabbanan, they darshan the pasuk slightly different, but they end up with the same result. The way you darshan the pasuk is Misha cheto bishkaga, one whose sin is bishkaga. Yatsa Mashiach, again, this comes to exclude the Kohen Gadol. She'ein cheto bishkaga, he never has a situation of chet bishkaga. Lo ba'avodas kochavim v'lo b'shar mitzvahs. According to the Rabbanan, it's not by avodah zarah or by shar mitzvahs. By all mitzvahs, you don't have a situation of chet bishkaga, because according to the Rabbanan, ela behelam davar im shigagas ma'isa. It's always going to be a helam davar together with shigagas ma'isa, meaning again, it's going to be a situation of a mistaken ruling followed by an action taken based on that ruling. And Rashi explains, V'shavin, and they both agree, She'ein Mashiach mevi asham talui, that the Kohen Gadol does not bring an asham talui, Techsiv ba'asham talui, because it's written by asham talui in the pasuk, V'chiper ha-kohen al shigegaso asher shagag v'hu lo yada, Misha cheto b'shgaga yatsa Mashiach. The point is, somebody whose chet is that he does the chet b'shogeg, that comes to exclude a Kohen Gadol, where there's an element of halam davar, there's an element of a mistaken ruling. And Rashi now explains, according to each Tana, how it's slightly different. Ula Rebbe, now according to Rebbe, how can we say that we're excluding a Kohen Gadol? But according to Rebbe, by a Kohen Gadol, by avodah zarah, it is b'shogeg. There is no helam davar by avodah zarah. That was the whole machlokus between Rebbe and the Rabbanan on the previous Amud. By avodah zarah, by a Kohen Gadol, is there helam davar and shigagas ma'isa, or is it just shigagas ma'isa? And Rebbe said on the previous Amud, it's just shigagas ma'isa. Ta'atanya le'el. That's what we learned in the Brisa earlier. Mashiach ba'avodas kochavim. When it comes to the Kohen Gadol by avodah zarah, Rebbe omer b'shigagas ma'isa. Rebbe says it's just shigagas ma'isa. There is not helam davar over there. You bring the carbon just for shigagas ma'isa. Elo Rebbe Savar, rather, Rebbe holds as follows. Here's how you understand the drasha from the pasuk according to him. Misha kol cheto b'shgaga. It has to be somebody who all of his sins are just shigagas ma'isa. Yatsa Mashiach, that excludes the Kohen Gadol. She'ein kol cheto b'shgaga. You don't have all of his sins are just shigagas ma'isa. T'va'avodas kochavim bilvad hu decheto b'shgaga. It's only by avodah zarah that we go by shigagas ma'isa. Aval b'shar mitzvahs, but by other mitzvahs, ein cheto b'shgaga bilvad. There, you don't bring the carbon just for shigagas ma'isa. Ela behelam davar im shigagas ma'isa. It has to be helam davar together with shigagas ma'isa. Again, it has to be the mistaken ruling followed by the action taken based upon that ruling. V'Rabbanan savri, and the Rabbanan hold Yatsa Mashiach, that the same pasuk excludes Kohen Gadol, she'ein cheto b'shgaga, that it's never only shigagas ma'isa according to the Rabbanan. Lo ba'avodas kochavim, but lo b'shar mitzvahs. That's not by avodah zarah or any mitzvahs. Ela helam davar im shigagas ma'isa. It's always helam davar with shigagas ma'isa according to the Rabbanan. And the point here is, uladivrei hakol, according to everyone, Mashiach ein mevi asham talui. The Kohen Gadol does not bring an asham talui. The kol shekein tzibur. Now, certainly a community does not bring an asham talui. The ein chayav an asham talui. They are certainly not chayav asham talui. The helam davar ksib behu behedyu, because there by a tzibur it says helam davar explicitly in the pasuk. And the Gemara continues with the Mishnah, Ein bezdin chayavin ad sheyoru b'davar shezadono kares v'shegagaso chatas. When it comes to the par helam davar shel tzibor, again, that's based on the mistaken ruling of the Sanhedrin, and then the tzibor, they sin based on that ruling. So the chiyuv to bring that par, the chiyuv to bring the par helam davar shel tzibor is only if they issue the mistaken ruling by something where if it's done on purpose, the punishment would be kares, and if it's done b'shogeg, the punishment would be a karban chatas. V'chein ha-Mashiach, and the same halacha is true when it comes to the Kohen Gadol's karban. V'lo ba'avodas kochavim, and also the same thing is true by avodah zarah when it comes by avodah zarah by a tzibor. Ad sheyoru al davar shezadono kares v'shegagaso chatas. It has to be that they issue the ruling with regards to something where if you do it on purpose, it's kares, and if you do it by mistake, it's a karban chatas. And Rashi explains, Ein bezin chayav and carbon. Bezin is not chayav a carbon. Ela al davar shezadono kares v'shegagaso chatas. It has to be that they issue the ruling something where if you did it b'mezid, it's kares. If you did it b'shogeg, it is a chatas. V'im horu b'davar shechayav and asham vaday. Let's say they issue a mistaken ruling by something where you would have had to bring a carbon asham, so betur, and then they'd be exempt. Techsib b'asham vaday, because by asham vaday it's written v'im nefesh achas. It says if one soul. So it's talking about an individual. Ubezdin ein heim b'chlal nefesh achas. Bezdin does not count as nefesh achas. V'yodin further, to b'ashamos ein behen din helam davar. By carbon asham, there's no concept of helam davar. There's no concept of any kind of lapse of awareness. The chayav and asham vaday al hamezid kashogeg, because by asham vaday you're actually chayav whether it's mezid just like shogeg, and so therefore you don't have that idea of helam davar, and that's another reason why that would not apply. V'chein ha-Mashiach, and the same is true by the Kohen Gadol. Ein mevi par. The Kohen Gadol doesn't bring his par. Ela al helam davar shezadono kares v'shegagaso chatas. Again, has to be a situation of the lapse of awareness where, again, if you did it on purpose, it's kares. You do it by mistake, it's a karban chatas. And again, the case by a Kohen Gadol as well is where he issues the mistaken ruling and then acts upon that ruling. Aval b'makam asham vaday. But let's say you have a situation where you would generally bring an asham. Chayiv lahavi asham vaday. A Kohen Gadol actually is obligated to bring an asham vaday. Again, above, we just excluded a Kohen Gadol from an asham taloi, but he does have to bring an asham vaday. Lefishu bechlal nefesh achas, because he counts as a nefesh. Ulahachi hishve letzibor the ein mevi par b'makam asham. Now, in the following way, the Kohen Gadol is similar to the tzibor, that he doesn't bring a par in a situation of a mistaken ruling that would have involved an asham, aval asham yavi, but he does bring the actual asham. In other words, the Kohen Gadol, in a situation where he does something, he does a violation which carries the punishment of bringing a carbon asham, he does bring that carbon asham. The point over here is he's not going to bring a par. Kedetanan l'kamon, as we're going to learn in the Mishnah later on, asham vaday hanasi hamashiach v'hayachid chayavin. When it comes to an asham vaday, the nasi and the Kohen Gadol and an individual, they're all chayiv to bring an asham vaday. Ubezdin petur. Now Bezdin is completely exempt from asham vaday, but again, a Kohen Gadol is not going to bring a par by a helam davar of an asham vaday, but he is going to bring the actual carbon asham. And the Gemara says, Minolan, from where do we know this halach in the Mishnah again that Bezdin is only chayiv to bring the par by a situation of zdono kares v'shegagaso chatos? The Tanya, as we learned in the following brisa, Rebbe says nemar kan oleho. It says over here oleho. That's talking about by the par helam davar shel tzibor. V'nemar lahalan, and it says further on oleh. It says oleh over there as well. We'll take a look at the full psukim. The first pasuk is v'noda hachatas asher chatu oleho v'hikrivu hakohol par ben bakar lachatas ve'viu osolif ne'ol moed. It's talking about the par of the kohol, and it says the word oleho. And then it also says oleh on the following pasuk. It says v'isha elachosa losikach litzra legalos ervosa oleh b'chayeh. It's talking about a person. It's talking about that a person should not marry a woman and her sister over there. In any case, it says aleha over here, it says aleha over there, and we learn as follows. Malahalon davar shazadono kares v'shigagaso chatas. Just like over there, we're talking about a sin where if you do it on purpose, it's kares. If you do it by mistake, it's a chatas. Afkan sotu over here, davar shazadono kares v'shigagaso chatas. We're talking about something where if you do it on purpose, it's kares. If you do it by mistake, it is a chatas. And the Gemara says, Eshkechon tzibor. Now we find this halacha by a tzibor, as we just said. Mashiach minolan. How do we know it's true by a Kohen Gadol also? Li'ashmas ha'am. That comes from li'ashmas ha'am. By Kohen Gadol it says li'ashmas ha'am. It compares his situation to the situation of the people, and so therefore his par as well is brought by zdono kares v'shigagaso chatas. Hare Mashiach ketzibor. The Kohen Gadol is like the tzibor. And what about Nasi? Where do we know this halacha by a Nasi? Yolef mitzvahs. That's learned out from the Gzeir Shav of the word mitzvahs. Ksiv gabe Nasi v'osa achas mikol mitzvos Hashem. By the Nasi it says the words mitzvos Hashem. Uchsiv b'tzibur, and it's written by the tzibur v'osu achas mikol mitzvos. It also uses the word mitzvos. And so we say, ma tzibur davar shezadon akaris v'shegagaso chatas. Just like a tzibur, it has to be a situation where b'mezid it's kares and b'shogeg it's a chatas. Af Nasi davar shezadon akaris v'shegagaso chatas. So too that's by a Nasi. It has to be something where it's b'mezid it's kares and b'shogeg it's a chatas. And yachid, now with regards to an individual, Rashi here explains, Yachid nami eino mevi chatos el al davar shezadon akaris. An individual only brings a chatos by something which, if he did it on purpose, it's kares. T'tanan sham kol mitzvah shabbatorah. So how do we know that idea by an individual? And so that the Gemara says, Amar Kra, the pasuk says v'im nefesh. It says the term v'im nefesh, the full pasuk over there. V'im nefesh achas techeto b'shkaga me'am haaretz ba'asosa achas mitzvahs Hashem asher lo se'asen Hashem. It talks about a person doing a sin b'shogeg, and so therefore the Gemara says v'yilmod tachton mi'elyon. We learn what is below from that which is above. And Rashi explains, again, Omar Kra, the pasuk says, "B'parshas Vayikra im nefesh." It says in Parshas Vayikra im nefesh, "V'yilmo tachton me'elyon," means to say yachid mi nasi. We're going to learn out the individual from the nasi. Just like by the nasi, it's kares, it's dono kares and shigagaso chatos. So too, when it comes to the individual, it's dono kares and shigagaso chatos. And the simple understanding of the Gemara over here is that the Gemara is learning from the Vav in V'im Nefesh. That's a connecting Vav, and therefore it connects to what was earlier. This pasuk of V'im Nefesh is in Vayikra Dalet Chav Zayin, and the pasuk by the Nasi is just a little bit earlier. It's in Vayikra Dalet Chav Beis, and that's why we are learning the Nefesh Achas. That's why we're learning the individual from the Nasi. And the Gemara continues at the two dots. The Mishnah said, "V'lo ba'avodas kochavim ad sheyoru," by avodah zarah as well. It's until they issue a ruling with regards to something that on purpose is kares, by mistake is a chatos. And the Gemara says, "Ba'avodas kochavim inolan." From where do we know this? By avodah zarah. The Tanur Rabbanan, because the rabbis taught, "L'fi sheyotza avodas kochavim lodun ba'atzma," because avodah zarah is judged on its own, meaning it's got its own independent pasuk in terms of the tzibor. It's treated different than other averos. Yachol yihu chayavin afilu al davar she'ein dono kares v'shigagaso chatos. So one might think that they're obligated by avodah zarah even by something that it's not, if it's b'mezid kares and not b'shogeg chatos. Nemar kan me'enei v'nemar lahalon me'enei. It says over here me'enei, and it says over there me'enei, meaning in general by the parhalam davar shel tzibor it says me'enei. Ma lahalon, just like over there davar she'zedono kares v'shigagaso chatos. We're talking about something where again on purpose is kares, b'shogeg is a chatos. Afkan, so to over here davar she'zedono kares v'shigagaso chatos. It's something that b'mezid is a kares and b'shogeg is a chatos. Eshkechon tzibor. Now we find that this is true by the tzibor, by the community. Yachid nasi Mashiach minolan. From where do we know that this applies? By the individual, by the nasi, by the Kohen Gadol. How do we know that? Amar Kra, the pasuk says v'im nefesh achas. This v'im nefesh achas is a different v'im nefesh achas. This is an im nefesh achas in Sefer Bamidbar. It's talking about avodah zarah. So it says v'im nefesh achas echad yachid, whether we're talking about an individual, v'echad nasi, whether we're talking about a nasi, the king, v'echad Mashiach, whether we're talking about the Mashiach, the anointed one, the Kohen Gadol. Kulan bichlal nefesh achas hein. They're all included in the term nefesh achas. And again, v'yilma tachton minha elyon. We learn what is below from that which is above. And the Gemara continues and asks, this all works out according to the one who uses the word aleha for a gzeira shava, so everything works out as we said. That's a reference to Rebbe above in the Gemara. Rebbe above learned out from the gzeira shava of aleha. He learned out that its sibur is only chayev if it's something where it's dono kares and shigagaso chatos. That comes from aleha, which is written by a person's not allowed to marry two sisters. And so we learn from there again something where it's zedono kares and shigagaso chatos. That works out. But according to the Rabbanan, demafki loli aleha la'arayos v'tzaros, they actually use aleha for something different. They use it having to do with arayos and having to do with tzaros, which are co-wives. Rashi explains, they use it for a different drasha. We say this in the first parak of Yevamos. Again, they have a limud over there. So according to that, so where do they know that when it comes to the tzibor bringing the par, it has to be something which is zedono kares and shigagaso chatos? What's the source according to the Rabbanan? And the Gemara says, Nafke lehu midamasni le Rabbi Yehoshua ben Levi livrei. They learn it from what Rabbi Yehoshua ben Levi taught to his son. The pasuk says, this pasuk is written a little bit further on, also again in the context by Avodah Zarah over there. Torah achas yeh lachem la'osa b'shkoga v'hanefesh asher tasa b'yod ram. It says Torah achas, it's one law for the person who does it by mistake. And the idea over there is huksha kol haTorah kula la'avodas kol chavim. The Torah over there, the entire Torah is being compared to Avodah Zarah, and we know by Avodah Zarah that it's dono kares and shigagas chatos. So ma avodas kol chavim shechayav al dono kares ve'al shigagas chatos. Just like by Avodah Zarah, we're talking about something where if you do it on purpose, it's kares. If you do it by mistake, it's a chatos. So afkan, so too when it comes to other mitzvahs, shechayav al dono kares ve'al shigagas chatos. We're talking about a situation where again, if you would do it on purpose, it would be kares, and by mistake, it would be a chatos. And the Gemara continues and asks, Eshkechon Yachid Nasiu Mashiach, Bein Ba'avodas Kochavim, Bein B'Shar Mitzvahs, this drush of Torah Achas, that works for a Yachid, for an individual, for Nasi, for the king, and for the Mashiach, meaning for the Kohen Gadol. That works both by Avodah Zarah and by Shar Mitzvahs, meaning to say that by all of those it needs to be something that's Dono Kares and Shigagaso Chatos, but still Tzibur Minolan. Where do we know that? By the Tzibur, by the community. And to that the Gemara says, Yolef Elyon Mitachton, we can learn what is written above from that which is written below. Tzibur is written just above by Avodah Zarah, it's written right before the Yachid, and so therefore you learn by Tzibur as well that this halacha applies. And Rashi explains, Torah Achas, it says in the pasuk, Torah Achas yolachem la'osa b'shgoga v'hanefesh asher tasa b'yad rama ba'avodas kochavim mishtoi kra. This pasuk is in the context of Avodah Zarah, the Tanya b'Sifri, as we learned in the Bryce and the Sifri. Rabbi Shimon Omer ba'avodas kochavim hakosim medaber. Rabbi Shimon says this pasuk is talking about Avodah Zarah. Shenamar kidvar Hashem boza. It says in the pasuk kidvar Hashem boza. It means sheboza al dibor rishon. It's referring to disgracing the first dibor. Shenamar bo, where it says Anochi Hashem Elokecha v'lo yeh lecha Elohim acherim al ponai, meaning to say again, it's referring to Avodah Zarah. Ma avodas kochavim shechayavin al dono kares dehacha ksiv he kares ti kares af, because over here it actually says he kares ti kares, so we're talking about kares. And then the Gemara said, Eshkechon Yachid Unasi Umashiach Bein Ba'avodas Kochavim Uvein B'Shar Mitzvahs. So we can use this drush of Torah Achas for a Yachid, for Nasi, for Mashiach. We can use that for both Avodah Zarah now and Shar Mitzvahs. T'chsiv V'im Nefesh. Again, the pasuk says V'im Nefesh. Uchsiv Torah Achas Yelochem V'Nefesh Asher Tasa B'Yod Rama. And then it says Torah Achas. So then we can compare to Yachid V'Nasi Umashiach B'Chlal V'im Nefesh Achas. Nasi, Mashiach, and the Yachid, they're all included in Vim Nefesh Achas, and so therefore they're included in Torah Achas. So we understand by Yachid, Nasi, Mashiach, by Avodah Zarah, by Shar Mitzvahs, all of them it's going to be Zdono, Kares, and Shigigaso Chatos. But Tzibur Minolan, where do we know this? By the Tzibur, by the community. And that the Gemara said, Yilmod Elyon Min HaTachton, we learn what's above from what's below. T'chsib Parsha Lamala, because right in the Parsha right above this, it says, V'chisishku Dahainu Tzibur. It talks about making a mistake in plural, that's the Tzibur. V'yilmod Mitachton, and then we learn from what's written right below, Mi V'im Nefesh, from V'im Nefesh. Ma'alahalan Davar Shechayavan Al Zdono Kares Val Shegagaso Chatos, Bein Ba'avodas Kochavim, Bein B'Shar Mitzvahs. Just like over there, we say that it's Zdono Kares and Shegagaso Chatos, whether by Avodah Zarah or Shar Mitzvahs. T'gabe Yachid Huksha Kol HaTorah Kula La'avodas Kochavim, because it's by Yachid that's written Torah Achas to compare the entire Torah to Avodah Zarah. So we say Af Tzibur, the same is true by the Tzibur. Ein Chayavan Ela B'Davar Shechayavan Al Zdono Kares Val Shegagaso Chatos, Bein Ba'avodas Kochavim, Bein B'Shar Mitzvahs. They're only going to be chayav if it's Dono Kares and Shegagaso Chatos, and that's true by Avodah Zarah, and that's true by other mitzvahs as well. And the Gemara continues and asks, V'Rebbe, now according to Rebbe who learned from Aleha up above, so Had Rabbi Yehoshua ben Levi, my Avile, what does he do with the pasuk of Rabbi Yehoshua ben Levi, again with the pasuk of Torah Achas, what does he do with that? Mapik le'lechiratanya, he uses it for what's taught in the following Brisa. L'fisha matzino shachilek hakasa ben rabim liyachidim, because we find by Avodah Zarah, the Torah makes a distinction between a multitude and between individuals. This is talking about the distinction between Avodah Zarah by an Ir Hanidachas, where the majority of the city worshipped Avodah Zarah, and by individuals who worship Avodah Zarah, we find there's distinctions. Rabim b'Sayif, for example, if it's the public, so they are punished by Sayif, which is beheading by the sword. Umemon on Avad, and then their property is also destroyed. But Yechidim, by individuals, b'Skila, they're punished with Skila, with stoning. Umemon on Palat, but their money is not destroyed, it escapes, so to speak. So therefore, since we find distinctions between Ir Hanidachas and between individuals, so Yachol Nachlok b'Karbanosayim, one might think we should also make a distinction in terms of the Karbanos they bring. Talmud Lomar, Torah Achas Yeh V'Gomer. So that's what the pasuk says. It says Torah Achas to say that the Karbanos are the same. And Rashi explains, Rabin b'sayif, the multitude of their punishment is sayif, beheading b'mezid anshe ir nidachas. That's talking about if an anshe ir nidachas, if they worship avodah zarah b'mezid, so then the punishment is sayif. Now yochol nachlok b'shogeg b'karbanosayim. What if you had a situation of shogeg? So then maybe they have different karbanos. Dechihechi decholok tzibor miyachidim de karban tzibor ba'avodas kochavim lo dami l'shum karban yachid. Just like we say tzibor is different than individuals because the karban of the community by avodah zarah is not similar to any carbon that's brought by an individual. So hachanami nachlok b'karbanosayim. So too we should distinguish by their karbanos to have a chiluk de merubin sha'asu shogeg in the ir nidachas. Let's say you have a situation of an ir nidachas b'shogeg to lola have a dami liolam l'shum carbon. That should not be similar to any other carbon. Lola tzibor v'lola yachid. It shouldn't be similar to the carbon of a tzibor or a yachid. It should be a totally unique carbon. Talmud lomer Torah achas. That's what the pasuk says. Torah achas. The ir hanidachas the shogeg ki yechidim damu. When it comes to an ir hanidachas by mistake by avodah zarah, we're going to say they're like yechidim by avodah zarah. Umaisi kol chad v'chad seirak yachid, and every individual is going to bring a female goat just like an individual. But the Gemara continues and asks, Maskefla Rav Chilkiah me Hagrunya. Rav Chilkiah from Hagrunya asks the following question: Ta'ima de lo chilek hakasav. The reason why the carbon of the people of an ir nidachas is not distinct is because the pasuk doesn't make it distinct. Hachilek, but if the pasuk said that they were distinct, they were separate. Havamina nachlok. So one might think that they bring a different carbon. That's a different carbon than any other scenario. And so he asked the following question: My naisi, what exactly would we think that they bring? Naisi par. If we're going to say that they should bring a par, they should bring a bull. So tzibor b'shar mitzvahs hu demaisu. That's already brought by the community by other mitzvahs. Again, that's the situation of the mistaken ruling of the tzibor by other mitzvahs. They bring a par. Naisi par liola v'sor lechatos. Let's say that they bring a par as an ola and a sor lechatos. That's tzibor ba'avodas kochavim hu demaisu. That's what's brought for the tzibor. Again, talking about the mistaken ruling by avodah zarah by the tzibor. That's what they bring. So that's not unique. Naisi soyer, not naisi soyer. Let them bring a male goat. Nasi b'shar mitzvahs hu demaisi. That's what a nasi brings by other mitzvahs. Naisi seira. Let them bring a female goat. Yachid nami hainu karbano. That's what we just said in Rashi. The individual brings that carbon. And so the Gemara continues and answers, Itzrich, it is necessary for the pasuk to make them distinct, because Sal Kadai Techamina, one might have thought, Tzibor Maisi Par Liola V'Sor Lechatos, maybe the Tzibor brings a Par as an Ola and a Sor as a Chatos, but when it comes to those of the Ir Nidachas, Naisi Ipcha, maybe they bring the reverse. Maybe they bring a Par as a Chatos and a Sor as an Ola, Par Lechatos V'Sor Liola, they bring a Par as a Chatos and a Sor Liola. Inami, or you might think Tzarech, they need to bring something different, Vein Lo Takana, but there is no real solution. So Kamash Malon, so it's coming to teach us again that they bring the same carbon as the individuals by Avodah Zarah. And Rashi explains, my naisi, what exactly should they bring? Anshe ir hanidachas rabim devasayif, meaning again the anshe ir hanidachas, where they get sayif if they do it on purpose. What carbon would they bring? Naisi par, if they're going to bring a par. So tzibor b'shar mitzvahs hu demaisi, that's what the tzibor brings by other mitzvahs. V'lo have a chiluk, that actually would not be distinct. V'kol shekein deboin chiluk bein anshe ir hanidachas l'tzibor. We certainly need a distinction between the people of the ir hanidachas and a tzibor. To ha'in tzibor nasin ir hanidachas klal, because there is no halacha of ir hanidachas when it comes to tzibor. Yachid nami hainu karbona, you're going to say they bring a seira, that's the same as a yachid, v'lo have a chiluk, that would not be distinct. And so then the Gemara said, Itzrich, it is necessary, Torah achas is necessary, because again, you might think it should be brought in the reverse. A par lechatos and a sor laola, inami tzarech lachlok b'karban, or you might think that you do need to have a distinct carbon, ve'ein lo takana l'irnidachas b'shogeg, but maybe there would be no solution for that, for an irnidachas b'shogeg, di'ef shalachlok, because it's impossible to find a distinct carbon. Kamash malon Torah achas, so it's teaching us, the pasuk of Torah achas teaches us, the maisi kol chad seira kiyachid, that again everybody brings a female goat just like the individual. And the Gemara continues, the kuli alma mios, but nevertheless, everybody seems to agree, that the context of these psukim is talking about avodah zarah, these psukim in Sefer Bamidbar. My mashma, how is it understood from these psukim that they're talking about avodah zarah? Amar Rava vi Tamer Rav Yeshua ben Levi, Rava says, and some say Rav Yeshua ben Levi says, v'amri lokadi, and some say it's unattributed. Amar Krotz, because the pasuk says, v'chi sishgu v'lo sasu es kol ha-mitzvos ha'ela, it says you'll make a mistake and not do these mitzvahs. What mitzvahs are we talking talking about? Ezuhi mitzvah shi shkula kechol mitzvahs. What mitzvah is equivalent of all the mitzvahs? Haviomer zu avodas kochavim. That's avodah zara. That's how we know the context of these psukim is avodah zara. Again, the full pasuk over here. V'chi zishgu v'lo sasu es kol mitzvah sa'ila asher dibar Hashem el Moshe. That's in Bamidbar Tes Vav Chav Beis. And then the psukim go on. Again, that's Bamidbar Tes Vav. All of these other psukim that we quoted with regards to avodah zara. And again, it's learned out from the fact that what mitzvah is equal to all the mitzvahs, that's avodah zara. The Gemara continues with another approach. Devei Rebbe Tana, in the yeshiva of Rebbe, it was taught Amar Krutz, because the pasuk says Asher Diber Hashem el Moshe, that Hashem spoke to Moshe. That's the same pasuk. Uchsiv, and it's also written Asher Tziva Hashem Aleichem Biad Moshe. It says that Hashem commanded to you in the hands of Moshe. Ezui mitzvah shi b'diburo shel HaKadosh Baruch Hu v'tziva al yedei Moshe. So what mitzvah was spoken by HaKadosh Baruch Hu and commanded through Moshe? That's what we understand from the combination of these two psukim. Haviomer zu avodas kochavim. That pasuk, that would be referring to avodah zara, because again, that was spoken by HaKadosh Baruch Hu and commanded through Moshe Rabbeinu. We'll take a look at the pasuk over here, the pasuk in Bamidbar Tesvav Chav Gimel, the very next pasuk after V'chi Sishku. It says, Eis kol asher tziva Hashem aleichem biyad Moshe min hayom asher tziva Hashem v'holol adorosechem. And so again, it's the dibur through HaKadosh Baruch Hu, the tzivoy through Moshe, and that is avodah zara, the Tana Devei Rabbi Yishmael, as was taught by the yeshiva of Rabbi Yishmael, Anochi v'lo yeh lecha, the Anochi and lo yeh lecha, the Aseres HaDibros, which talk about avodah zara, mipi hagavura shamanim. We heard those from the mouth of the Almighty. We heard those from HaKadosh Baruch Hu. That's the idea that the dibur was from HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And the Gemara continues, Devei Rabbi Yishmael Tan, in the yeshiva of Rabbi Yishmael it was taught, and we will continue with this discussion in the next video on Daf Ches Amud Beis.